The wealth gap in the USA and honestly the rest of the world is going completely nuts. Actually, that's one of the things that set the USA apart for many decades, is that we had a thriving and effective middle class. As you go through suburbia today, you can see some remnants of this ancient Roman idea of having a standing army of relatively well-fed and cared for middle-class semi-plebeians. You have the fences and the individual homes that are pretty resistant to land invasions. But the ruse, the premise is wearing thin. I have been talking about this for years, personally. When I was first starting my writing career, you guys might be aware of the platform Listverse. It was pretty popular for a while, and I wrote a few articles for that platform back in the day, and people would accuse me of being alt-right, but then they'd also accuse me of being communist, because my views are really, they don't really fall into either side of the spectrum, because I would say things about, just like libertarian ideology, and I also say that we have too much wealth disparity. We have an enormous wealth gap, and that's a huge problem for our society. And it's just gotten worse. We all know that during COVID, there was this enormous transfer of wealth from the average people to the ultra wealthy. And it's continuing. The middle class is disappearing. And it's just all that money is being funneled into the hands of the ultra wealthy. And when I define wealth, I'm not talking about if you set aside $1 million or $5 million or $10 million. That's just like, good for you. Good job. You have been successful within the system. You have made yourself some money, you've provided yourself some security in this world. Assuming it's not all in Bitcoin or something, assuming you've diversified your investments to some degree. And even to the point of like $100 million. That may be a bit excessive, but good for you. You're quite wealthy to the point of being influential. But no one needs $200 million. No one needs $500 million. Certainly nobody needs on God's green earth $1 billion in their name. That's not just like, I want to have wealth for my children and grandchildren. I just want to live a biblical life, and I want to pass down and leave an inheritance for my grandchildren. They don't need $1 billion. You can give your children even an inflated currency, $1 or $2 million, same for your grandchildren, and they can just invest that and not be stupid and turn it into the same amount that you had by the time they get to your age. So I don't know exactly how this works. I don't know if the government comes in and confiscates excess wealth. What I'd really prefer is if people would just live a more really biblical life and donate and help out with public works, be true philanthropists, true aristocrats in the best meaning of the word, where when you have that much wealth, you should look at your life and be like, well, I certainly don't need this, but there are so many who do. And I think it should be voluntary, because then if you have the government come in and confiscate the wealth, well, what are they going to do with it? Are they really going to use it properly? Are they just going to use it to enrich their own cronies? Is it just going to go from the hands of one set of elites to another? But none of these quibbling aspects get rid of the problem that we have such an immense amount of wealth held in the hands of the 10% or the 1%, and so little in the hands of the remaining 90 or 99. I did those protests back in like 2012, 2013, or 2010 is really, I think I got started, the 1% protests. I was part of that. I marched on Tacoma one time. I didn't actually go camp out like a homeless person in the parks or anything like that, but that might have been astroturfed, but I feel like that was the last time people ever really even talked about this or stood up to it. I feel like we've just given up at this point. But in the intervening years, it's just become more and more of a problem. And I think it's one of the main things that is fueling the probably inevitable financial collapse in the United States. People say there's no alternative to the dollar as a reserve currency, but that's changing quickly. And the military might that we use to back up our currency is eroding now that, half the kids have autism or have diabetes and can't see. They can't fight in the military. I'd probably be disqualified personally too. I know probably pretty much everyone in my generation would. So there are some potential fixes or things that might make this a little bit better. First of all, the early baby boomers, the ones who inherited an excellent post-war economy and then benefited the most from those circumstances, are starting to shuffle off, and they're redistributing their wealth. But those boomers do also have some degree of validity in their position that the incoming generations probably will not steward that wealth as well as they did. And on top of that, it's all inflated, verging on hyperinflation. So the wealth they accrued is no longer worth as much as it used to be. So I don't really know what the solution is, but I do know that there is a threshold of excessive wealth, at which point it should all just be donated to some sort of philanthropical endeavor, whether through the government or through private institutions. I prefer private institutions, but it should just be normalized among the wealthy that if you have accrued more than $100 million to your name, you need to pass that along. And if that were to happen, just within the confines of our country or developed Western nations, then I think all these issues would disappear. But you do have degeneration over time. And some people say it's a cycle, or how does the saying go? Weak men breed hard times create strong men, and strong men create easy times, and easy times create weak men again. But I think there is a net loss with each repetition of that equation. So we've seen this, for instance, in India, where India was once one of the greatest civilizations on earth, but I'm talking over 1,000 years ago. And now each progressive generation, the British colonization helped to some degree. They got railroads and infrastructure and some other things, but each progressive and subsequent generation in India is poorer. Their social services keep breaking down. Life just gets worse and worse there. And we might be facing an India-fication here in the West, in the United States and parts of Europe, in the Antipodes. South Africa is definitely feeling the heat. That's a place where there's genuine genocidal intent being exercised against the West in the attempt to make it just the new Zimbabwe. And that didn't go well. Hyperinflation, nobody knew how to run the farms. Lots of people starved. So I'm trying to look at this in a way where we don't have some kind of financial collapse on the horizon here in the West, in the United States. I'm trying to look at this in a positive way, but I don't think it's possible to stem the tide at this point unless wealth is somehow redistributed. And of course, you have historical examples of redistribution of wealth. They did that in Nazi Germany. George Soros took part in that. They did that in communist Russia and in basically every other communist regime as well. The government came in and redistributed the wealth. And I would say, we should just count on the philanthropic hearts of the ultra wealthy, but they have gamed and created the current system over the course of multiple generations at this point for the explicit purpose of doing what has happened. We had a Federal Reserve and it was shut down, and then we had a civil war and we had something called Reconstruction, And in the midst of all this reconstruction of American society, they managed to slip in another Federal Reserve. And then 50 years later, thereabouts, we stopped valuing our currency based on gold. And then in the 70s, there was a similar situation. No jobs, inflation. And I don't see any way out of it now unless the ultra wealthy voluntarily, through some sort of mass religious awakening or something, some spiritual realization of the issue at hand, if they just voluntarily give up their wealth. And so I pray, I call upon the Holy Spirit to come down on these people and realize the plight that they have engendered in their society, because it's a very nihilistic philosophy in the end, where you feed off of the little people for as long as you can, but the society itself is built on the little people. I'm not talking about for their sake. The money that they make, the ultra wealthy, is built off the toil of little people. So if there are no more little people, or if they no longer toil, what's going to happen? Their wealth evaporates too. So it's just this kind of mad dash to acquire as many resources as possible in the near term, with no real thought for the future. And that's how I know that this is a ultimately satanic sort of system, where Satan also knows his time is short, so he does as much as he can in the near term to acquire power in this world. And the only antidote to this is the Holy Spirit, is God. You know, we just celebrated Michaelmas, and in Revelation, Saint Michael cast down Satan. We need Saint Michael now more than ever to guide us into battle against this wealth inequality, and to just guard the average people from this predatory system that, again, it's no accident that all this wealth has been accrued. It was on purpose. The system as it exists was designed to do exactly this. And all that's happening is what, you know, a private Federal Reserve is just designed to do. But again, this is a problem. This is not something that we can just let go. Maybe we need more protests, but again, those were probably AstroTurf, the 1% protests, or whatever they were called. It's been long enough now that I forget what it was actually called. But just as usual, my only solution here is calling upon God and just praying to God that he fixes the situation through some divine means beyond our understanding. But I really don't think there can be any staving off the financial collapse or any real regeneration of the American or overall Western economy without redistribution of wealth, and hopefully voluntary, because when you get the government involved, historically, things just go from bad to worse. So let me know what you guys think about this in the comments, whether you think the ultra wealthy are the problem, how you think we should eat the rich, so to speak, you know, how the redistribution should work. Let me know any struggles that you're currently going through, ways that you're feeling this right now, because it's getting worse and worse, where there are some people who are completely insulated from these problems, but basically everyone else is feeling the squeeze in one way or another. So let me know what you're going through in the comments. We can start a sort of solidarity group here. If you haven't, please do like the video and subscribe, and click the video in the corner if you can't wait for more content. And I'll see you soon with more content about this, about cannabis addiction, about just various things in life right now that we need to focus on as history turns a pretty dark corner. So God bless you guys. Saint Michael be with you. I'll see you soon.